But we are here on a very important mission, and that's to talk about the state of technology in the federal government. Some of these technology projects, IT projects, have been problematic, to say the least. We're here to look at some of those problems and see how we can fix them. It's not just some of the results that you all talked about today, which we want to get into further detail on, but it's also, you know, how are these projects solicited, how are they awarded, how are they monitored, how are they implemented. We also need to look at the workforce. The IT workforce, of course, is a big issue right now. How do you attract the right people and retain them, given the private sector competition? We've talked about that some in this subcommittee, and we need to be sure we have some of the best technical folks possible to carry out some of these difficult projects that you have. We've seen this with VA recently, Mr. Warren. I'm sure we're going to talk some about that in more detail, but from what we hear from press accounts and other sources, it sounds like that expertise of the staff has been part of the problem with the scheduling and with the IT issues. This hearing is not the first hearing that Congress has had on this topic. There have been a long history of congressional inquiries into how the federal government can better implement IT systems. Almost 10 years ago, the IRS spent about $3 billion on an IT system and found out at the end of the process it didn't work. And the Appropriations Committee started a commission that I co-chaired with then Senator Bob Kerrey. And we spent 2 years looking at it and came out with a bunch of recommendations that I think have helped with the IRS on their restructuring and reform. Again, unfortunately, we've seen lots of instances where there have been high-profile IT acquisition failures, and so we have lots of work to do. The Defense Department's here. We're going to talk some about your issues. We're told that getting this Defense Department audit done is partly an IT challenge, and you know, getting the DoD audit ready has been a big priority of mine. I'm sure senators who are with me here on the panel today we'll talk about whether that's true, whether the IT issue is really one of the problems that's holding that up. Obviously, with regard to the Affordable Care Act, there's some ongoing concerns about the IT side. And bottom line is, what we have to acknowledge is that although the private sector is not perfect at these big projects, and there have been plenty of failures on the private sector side too, more on the public side. And a lot of it's the capability in the private sector side seems to be advanced in terms of fielding innovative and adaptive IT systems. The GAO has been helpful, and Mr. Powner, thank you for being here today. And you testified today about some of these problems you've identified, but more important to me, and I think to the chairman, is, you know, what are the solutions? You've given us some ideas today that I just heard. You talked about implementing best practices, establishing and implementing incremental development policies, increased attention on federal data center consolidation. Those savings are pretty impressive. You said basically $4.5 billion over the next couple of years, it sounds like. Strengthening portfolio stat, which is something is very important. Having been over at OMB, I think that is part of the answer here. Anyway, I hope today we can have an opportunity to get some clarification on some of these issues, and more importantly, again, some of the steps needed to impact substantive change, as well as how each of your departments are faring in some of the initiatives you talked about today. And I look forward to asking some further questions, Mr. Chairman, when we get an opportunity to do that. I will do my questions later after you two have a chance to, since I did my long opening statement here. But I do appreciate the witnesses taking the time to be here and to prepare testimony for us today. Thank you. And thank you all for your service and your willingness to, as Mr. McCormick said, probably earn a little less than you could in the private sector because you're trying to do public service and ensure that people are taken care of. On the VA front, let me just follow up with our previous back and forth. It sounds like one thing that you have identified, Mr. Warren, is that you said there's an interface problem. What I read that to mean is, you know, it's too hard for some people to use the old system. As I've said, there's been 10 years of problems that have been reported. GAO, your IG, have demonstrated that there are scheduling difficulties with the system. And part of the problem with not being able to operate the system probably goes to the workforce not having the training that they would need to be able to do that well, because in 2009, your Inspector General reported that there was very little training or mentoring being conducted in veterans' health facilities. Again, in 2013, just last year, an inspection concluded that staff members did not consistently and correctly use the consult management reporting and tracking systems. In clinics, more than half of schedulers reported that they had not received any training. So I guess my question to you is, do we have improperly trained schedulers here? And if so, why? And what are we going to do about it? IT system strengths obviously are irrelevant if the people charged with using the system can't interface, as you say, with the system, can't pull up the data, as you say, and aren't getting the training to be able to use it. How would you respond to that?
Sir, I provide the tools that the individuals at the sites use. I will gladly bring back to you for the record the actions that are taking place, significant engagement by leadership to deal with the issues identified. We're also being respectful of the work that the IG team is doing with respect to their audit and investigation. But significant boots on the ground to deal with the issues that were identified as part of the assessment. We have efforts underway to simplify the interface, to deal with some of the things that were identified as part of the assessment, to get that in place while we acquire the replacement, a commercial product to replace that scheduling system. But glad to get that back to you, sir, for the record in terms of the multiple things underway that are being applied to address the issues that were raised, sir.
Let me just back up and be sure you understood my question. My question to you is about the training. Do you think that the training is adequate now? Do you think it's part of the reason we've had these, as you say, unacceptably long wait lists, and certainly in those cases where there was fraud? We don't know where that happened, but we certainly know it happened in Phoenix, and there are 42 other VA centers being investigated now by the IG. Do you think part of it is this issue that was identified by GAO and by the IG in the last couple of years, 2009 IG, 2013, an inspection, again, that said that more than half of the schedulers reported they had not received any training? Has that been part of the problem or not?
Sir, I don't have direct knowledge, so we'll take the reports at face value in terms of those were issues identified that need to be worked with. As the acting secretary had laid out, there's a multitude of items that we are putting in place, actions taking place to deal with that. Training is one of them. So the reports identified that. I have no basis to disagree. And again, we'll get you the response in terms of what we are doing about the training issue, as well as I believe the assessments are being rolled out in terms of what was identified, sir.
You said a moment ago you're pursuing commercially available software, it sounds like, for scheduling. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. There is an acquisition. There's a meeting with industry taking place next week to walk through the requirements, and then there are individual vendor interviews to make sure we have the acquisition correct. Before the end of this fiscal year, that acquisition will be out to replace the commercial product, and we'll be building on the interfaces that were developed as part of the America Competes Act, and using the sandboxes or test areas to have the vendors come in and demonstrate their solutions to show that it meets the clinical needs.
Yeah, again, I think there was plenty of evidence that we had a problem here, and it's now come to light with these extreme examples. But really, when you look back over the last 10 years, GAO and your own IG have identified some of the problems and its difficulty in using the system, perhaps. Certainly a lot of 70% of the VA centers, there was at least some instances of people going around the system, improper training, more than half of the schedulers not receiving training. Why did we miss those flags?
Sir, it's difficult for me to opine on the direct operational in terms of how care is given by the schedulers. Again, a tool is neutral. Yes, you could do better work on the interfaces, on the usability design, but components of the issues that the VA has developed deal with the people and the process component as well.
Well, we would love for you to provide some more specific answers to some of our questions to the subcommittee, if you would, please. And it's just, you know, for us to be able to understand better what's going on, what are the next steps for improving the scheduling software system. You talked some about that today. What is your timeline on it? You mentioned by the end of the year to have some of this commercially available acquisition started. What are some of the key capabilities you're looking for? What are your risks? What do you see as the greatest risks in the plan to be able to anticipate those this time better? And I think you've answered this, but are you leveraging commercially available software?
We are, sir, and I will glad to get back on the record the range of questions you had asked.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Miller, I got some questions for you. My time is expiring here, but one of the issues I think we'd like to get in front of is this interoperability between VA and DOD. You talked about it today, and the need to modernize the electronic health records. I think there are, unfortunately, a lot of cases of service members falling between the cracks somehow when they leave your side of the house and go over to the VA, and that transition is often tough. And some of it is record management systems, as I understand it. I understand that service members can receive an electronic copy of their health records only if they request it, but many either don't know that or fail to request it until it's too late. Is that accurate?
Sir, I'll have to take it for the record to get the official policy, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the initiatives we have undertaken is to provide access through Blue Button so that our service members can get access to the record, but I'll come back for the record and answer that, sir. Okay,
I think that would be interesting for the committee to know. I don't know if you know this legislation called the Medical Evaluation Parity for Service Members Act. It's called MEPS, and it says let's get an evaluation when people go into the military, when they exit, have some sort of a benchmark to know, trying to avoid some of these tragic instances that we all know about, mental health concerns. That legislation would require DOD to report to Congress on its ability to provide service members an electronic copy of their health records upon separation from the military. If you wouldn't mind looking at that legislation and giving us your opinion on it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, will do, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.